Emma Carter stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the coffee from her mug, staring blankly through the kitchen window. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the neatly trimmed lawns of Maplewood Estates, a neighborhood built on quiet routines and unspoken loneliness. The sound of the front door clicking shut signaled her husband's departure. "See you Sunday," James had muttered earlier, already half distracted by his phone as he gathered his briefcase. He hadn't kissed her goodbye. Again. Emma sighed, rolling her shoulders as if she could shake off the growing weight of their hollow marriage. 10 years, and their conversations had dwindled to grocery lists and schedules. James wasn't cruel. He wasn't unfaithful. He was simply absent. She turned, setting her cup in the drying rack before heading upstairs. The master bathroom was her sanctuary, the one place where she didn't have to pretend. She twisted the shower knob, listening to the pipes groan before releasing a steady stream of steaming water. As she undressed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror, soft curves, sun-kissed skin, and tired eyes that held a longing even she couldn't define. She stepped under the water, letting it wash over her, soothing but not silencing the thoughts that had been creeping in lately. Was this it? Was this what the rest of her life would look like? As she reached for the shampoo, movement outside the frosted bathroom window made her freeze. The pane was cracked open slightly, allowing warm air to mix with the cool morning breeze. Through the blurred glass, she saw a figure, broad shoulders, tall frame, dark skin. Her breath hitched. Dante Williams. Her new neighbor. The man who had moved in 2 weeks ago, whose presence had already stirred something unfamiliar in her. She had noticed him, of course, everyone had. He wasn't just attractive. He carried himself with a quiet confidence and easy strength. But it was his eyes that unsettled her most. They were deep, searching, as if he could see things she wasn't ready to admit. Emma's pulse quickened as she remained still, the water cascading down her back. Was he looking? Had he seen her? The logical part of her mind told her it was just a coincidence. He was probably working in his yard, unaware of her presence. But then, just for a second, he turned his head, his gaze aligning with the window. Their eyes met. Even through the distortion of the glass, Emma felt the connection snap taut between them, like a live wire sparking in the air. She should have stepped back, should have reached for a towel, but she couldn't move. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't embarrassed. She was thrilled. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, mingling with the heat of the water. Dante's gaze lingered before he looked away, resuming whatever he had been doing. The moment was over, evaporating like steam against the glass. And yet Emma felt different, changed. Heart pounding, she reached for the faucet, turning off the water. She grabbed a towel, wrapping it around herself, but before she stepped away from the window, she did something reckless. She lingered. For just a second longer than necessary, she let herself exist in that space of possibility. Then, with a steadying breath, she turned away, leaving damp footprints on the tiled floor as she walked out of the bathroom. What had just happened? And why did she want it to happen again? The afternoon heat hung heavy in the air as Emma stepped onto her porch, clutching a glass of iced tea. The condensation beaded along its surface, mirroring the dampness on the back of her neck. She told herself she was just here for fresh air, that she wasn't waiting for anything or anyone. The quiet hum of the suburban street stretched before her, punctuated by the distant bark of a dog and the occasional rustling of leaves. Across the yard, Dante Williams stood by his truck, unloading a bag of mulch. His muscles tensed and flexed beneath his fitted t-shirt, his movements unhurried, deliberate. Emma exhaled slowly, her grip tightening around the glass. She should go inside. Instead, she watched. As if sensing her gaze, Dante straightened, glancing toward her porch. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held hers for a moment longer than polite conversation required. The same quiet tension from that morning crackled between them, invisible yet undeniable. Then he smiled. Not the friendly, distant nod of a neighbor, but something deeper, something that made the pit of Emma's stomach tighten. A slow, knowing curve of his lips, like he could still see the way she had stood there, wrapped in nothing but a towel, breathless against the bathroom window. Emma swallowed hard. She had two choices: pretend nothing had happened, retreat inside, and push the memory to the farthest corner of her mind.
Or she could stay. She chose to stay.
Lifting her glass in an almost casual gesture, she called out, "Getting your yard in order?" Dante wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a streak of dust against his rich brown skin. Trying to. The previous owners didn't care much for landscaping. Emma stepped off the porch, closing the distance between them. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. Looks like a lot of work. Dante chuckled, setting the bag down. Hard work doesn't bother me. His gaze flickered over her, assessing, lingering just long enough to make her stomach twist. You live here long? Almost 8 years. That's so. He nodded, as if filing that information away. Must be nice, knowing a place inside and out. Emma wasn't sure if he meant the house or herself. She took a sip of her drink, the ice clinking against the glass. It has its moments. Dante held her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. Then, with an easy confidence, he leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. So, his voice was low, smooth. You always leave your bathroom window open? The words landed between them, like a match to dry leaves. Emma's breath caught. He wasn't going to pretend. He wasn't going to let it disappear into the unspoken space between them. A slow warmth spread through her chest, curling down her spine. She could deny it, laugh it off, change the subject. But a part of her, a reckless, aching part, didn't want to. She tilted her head, watching him carefully. Should I start keeping it closed? Dante's lips twitched, his gaze never wavering. Depends. On what? His voice dropped slightly, the words slow, deliberate. On whether you meant to leave it open. Emma's pulse thrummed beneath her skin. A challenge. A question. An invitation. She could feel the weight of his attention, the way it settled over her like a whisper against bare skin. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was dangerous, that she was playing with something she didn't understand. But the rest of her, the part that had felt seen for the first time in years, didn't move away, didn't break eye contact. She lifted the glass to her lips, letting the cold sip slide over her tongue before answering. I guess we'll find out. Then she turned, walking back toward her porch. Not running, not retreating, just waiting to see if he'd follow. The evening air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant promise of rain. Emma stood at the kitchen counter, absently wiping the rim of her wine glass with a pad of her thumb. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustling of leaves outside the open window. She should have been thinking about James, about dinner plans, about the mindless television they would watch together before retreating to separate sides of the bed. Instead, her thoughts were tangled in the memory of Dante's voice, the way his question had settled deep in her bones. Did you mean to leave it open? She had replayed the moment more times than she cared to admit. The heat in his stare, the deliberate weight of his words. He wasn't just flirting, he was waiting for her to answer in ways that had nothing to do with words. A quiet knock at the front door startled her from her thoughts. Emma's heart stuttered. It was too late for neighbors, too early for James. When she opened the door, she wasn't surprised. Dante stood on her porch, hands in the pockets of his jeans, his gaze steady. He wasn't dressed for yard work now, just a fitted black t-shirt and dark jeans, casual yet intentional. Emma inhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the door. Didn't take you for a man who knocks. A slow smirk lifted one side of his mouth. Didn't take you for a woman who waits. The words sent a shiver through her, though she masked it well. She stepped aside, an unspoken permission lingering in the space between them. Dante entered, his presence shifting the atmosphere of the house. It was different having him inside. Outside, there had been a safety net, a plausible deniability. But here, in her dimly lit foyer, the tension coiled tighter. Emma turned toward the kitchen, kneading the counter between them. Drink.
Sure.
She poured him a glass of whiskey, sliding it across the marble surface. He took it without breaking eye contact, bringing the rim to his lips. They stood in silence, the energy between them humming like a low current. Dante set his glass down first, his fingers lingering on the edge. "You've been thinking about this." Emma's breath hitched.
You don't know that.
His dark eyes flickered over her, slow and deliberate. "I do." She should tell him to leave. She should laugh, shake her head, pretend this was just harmless banter. Instead, she tilted her chin. "And what makes you so sure?" Dante leaned in slightly, his voice low, intimate. "Because if you hadn't, you wouldn't have let me in." Emma's fingers curled against the counter. He was right. But acknowledging that truth meant acknowledging something far more dangerous, that she didn't just let him in tonight. She had let him in the moment she didn't close that window. A roll of thunder echoed in the distance, the sky outside darkening. Dante reached out, his fingers grazing the inside of her wrist. The contact was featherlight, yet it set fire to every nerve in her body. "This is a bad idea," she murmured, but she didn't move away. Dante's thumb traced a slow circle against her skin. "Then tell me to go." Emma parted her lips, but no words came, because she didn't want him to, and Dante knew it. His touch lingered a moment longer before he pulled back, his smirk laced with knowing. He reached for his drink, finishing the last sip before setting the glass down with finality. "Not tonight," he said, voice edged with something that sounded like both restraint and promise. Emma exhaled, watching as he turned toward the door. He didn't look back when he left. He didn't have to, because they both knew he'd be back. The house felt different after Dante left. Emma stood in the kitchen long after the door had shut, staring at the empty glass he had left behind. The rim of it still carried the warmth of his touch, a ghostly imprint of the tension that had simmered between them. She exhaled, running a hand through her hair, but the restless energy inside her refused to settle. "Not tonight." Those words had clung to her skin, a deliberate pause rather than an ending. Dante had given her an out, a chance to step away before the inevitable. And yet, she wasn't sure she wanted that chance at all. A flicker of headlights washed across the living room walls.
James.
The reminder struck like a slap of cold water, and she moved quickly, rinsing the glass, erasing any trace of the conversation that had nearly changed everything. By the time James stepped inside, she was already leaning against the counter, a picture of effortless normalcy. "You're home early," she said, forcing a casual tone. He dropped his keys into the dish near the door, rubbing a hand over his face. "Flight got canceled. Thought I'd just drive back instead of waiting." His voice was flat, heavy with exhaustion. Emma nodded, watching as he moved through the motions, setting down his bag, loosening his tie, running a distracted glance over the house. He didn't notice the tension in her shoulders. Didn't ask why her pulse was still racing beneath her skin. "Long day?" she asked. "Same as always." He exhaled, stretching his arms before moving toward the stairs. "Gonna shower." She swallowed hard. The irony didn't escape her. James disappeared down the hallway, and Emma remained where she was, gripping the counter as if it could anchor her to something steady. The sound of water running upstairs echoed through the house, and for a brief moment, she imagined a different reality, one where it wasn't James in that shower, where she hadn't just spent an evening towing the edge of something irreversible. Her phone buzzed against the counter. A single message. "Still thinking about it?" Her breath caught.
Dante.
She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She should ignore it. She should delete it. But instead, she let herself feel the weight of his presence lingering in her house, the way her skin still hummed from the briefest touch of his fingers. The choice was hers. "Not tonight," he had said. But what about tomorrow?